Have you ever thought about how to make fitness your therapy? In today's episode, we will be talking about how to do this with Shona Vertue, who's an ex-professional dancer, former elite gymnast, while being an international leader in yoga, while also being a personal trainer. Shona, I'm so happy to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And to kick off the conversation, I'd love to go deep into everything that you've created as someone that's played a very big role in this community and fitness, and especially now with the transition that you've made with psychology. I'd love to go deeper in what made you develop the Vertue Method and what was the inspiration for it.
Yeah, look, it's hard because the inspiration probably is like very, spans my entire life, starting, from when I was a gymnast and trained really intensely and, both flexibility and strength. But just to kind of give you a summary, the Vertue Method is an approach to training which incorporates strength training, fitness training, flexibility training, and this extra side of things, which is, I would say, nourishment, but not just nourishment nutritionally, but also in terms of your mind. So we look at meditation. We also look at things like cognitive behavioral therapy, and common psychological methodology applied to fitness and training, because there is obviously, as I'm sure you know, like a bi-directional relationship between the two. So essentially what we want is to make sure that we're giving equal parts attention to all of those areas in our life. And what I found, and the reason I created this method, was because so many clients I'd worked with, hundreds of clients across the years. I've been a personal trainer for nearly 2 decades now, and people will often gravitate towards the thing that they like, which is a good thing. Like, let that be the thing that gets you started. So it might be like running marathons, or it might be getting really strong. But I often found that, people who were really great at running marathons, often could barely touch their toes, or, yogis, people that were really excited about flexibility work, lacked strength, lacked fitness. And most people across the board did not make the association between just how impactful psychological mechanisms are on the efficacy, right, of all of our training programs. So how well they work, and how much, if you can start to get a hold of your psychology and your cognition and your behavior, which is really the underlying principle of all of it, how much that will boost your results long-term, not just short-term. So yeah, it was about kind of being a one-stop shop for all of those practices: strength, fitness, flexibility, and behavior, to sum it all up.
And now that you've been introducing psychology more into that model, what do you find is like the most important thing that you've learned in that process as you've been kind of evolving the Vertue Method over the last couple of years?
Okay. That's a really good question. So I went back to uni to finish a psych degree, specifically so that I could apply it to everything that I was doing. And I just thought, okay, yeah, this will be cool. I'll just grab a couple of tips from psych. And what I found was that I had to do work on myself. And, that's very natural. Lots of people that, go into the psychology space find they're like, oh, actually, you know what? I have to work. There's some things that are coming up for me. And so I think, to sum it into one thing that's most important. Look, I think different things will definitely be important to different people. So different aspects. I mean, psychology is so broad, right?
Yeah.
Even cognition is super broad. But if we look at the thing that tends to hold people back a lot, and something that I'm really working on with my current clients, is self-perception and self-schemas. So this is a real cognitive behavioral therapy kind of concept, but really it's looking at the fact that we have these self-schemas, and a schema is sort of like a framework for how we interpret the world. And I mean, I'm being very top line here and giving you Cliff's notes, but we can always go deeper into anything. But really it's about how some of those limiting beliefs you might have about yourself. And what I found is that when I start to work with clients, particularly clients that are like really having trouble, like the ones that, say that they've tried absolutely everything, and they come to me and they're like, I don't know what to do. I've tried this, I've tried that, tried dieting, I've tried, focusing on strength, I've tried focusing on programs. And the one aspect that's missing is really looking at that behavior stuff. So it's like, okay, we need to actually go deeper and try to identify your relationship with exercise. What is it? And often what will come up is that different people have different relationships to exercise. And so some people have this underlying belief that they're always going to fail, or they're just not good at exercise, or that they just don't like it because, you know, when they were younger, they didn't win at sports, or they didn't do well. Or some people have like really deep core memories that have set them up for their entire life and to interpret how they feel about exercise. And parental influence can have an influence here, can really make a difference. And so it's just looking at these sorts of things and then trying to unpack them, unravel them a little bit, and create new relationships with fitness, new kind of narratives that we tell ourselves about exercise, fitness, training, nutrition, all of those things.
When it comes to limiting beliefs too, because I feel like generally quite a lot of people are like, the new generation has become a lot less rigid when it comes to exploring fitness. But what would you say is like the most common limiting belief you've come across as you've been training your clients and like seeing the evolution of your method being applied?
Good question. Okay, so I would say, and you know, this is found in the research in health psychology research, one of the most important factors in whether someone will continue along a path or even start along a health path. And this is in relation to not just exercise, physical exercise, but it's like anything. So whether it's like making sure you get your breasts tested or, you know, get a pap smear, things like that. One of the biggest barriers to entry of a particular health habit is often a lack of self-efficacy. And self-efficacy is essentially, as we were talking about, like limiting beliefs. It's essentially saying, well, no, that's not what self-efficacy is, but essentially self-efficacy is looking at how much do I think I'm going to be able to achieve this if I put my time and effort into it. And if you have high self-efficacy, you essentially have high self-belief. You think that you're going to be able to do it. Okay, cool. So, yep, anything I embark upon, I will achieve it. I will get it done. And we know that those people are the types of people. I mean, it's very logic when you think about it, but we often forget it when we're in our own story about it. So if you have low self-efficacy, then you don't believe in yourself. You don't believe in your ability to do this one particular thing. And I will stress, it's not that you don't believe in yourself across the board, but it might be that in this one element, you lack that belief in yourself. So I do find, to come back to your question, is that the really, I think the thing that most people are identifying is this, like, oh, I thought that I believed in myself, but actually when it comes to the crunch, when it comes to the making those changes, I have this kind of cognitive dissonance a little bit. I have this like, I don't believe in myself, but I want this thing. And so it's about trying to kind of navigate that a little bit.
Beautiful. I guess it's like, because a lot of people, and this is something I've noticed when I've been like studying athletes and cognition, and when we've also been going into the research, there's so many different like levels of like emotional, mental, and physical strength that are explored when you are kind of developing your fitness routine and like, I guess, what works well for your body and what you're being called to more to when it comes to training. So for you personally, how did you like find that balance to help you, you know, create the foundation before Vertue Method came to life? Like for you personally, on your own journey?
Yeah, I was recently asked this. It's hard for me because, well, it's not hard for me, but I mean, one thing I do acknowledge about my journey is that it is very much something that has been there my entire life, because, you know, my parents enrolled me into gymnastics at a very young age, and I was pulled out of kind of like this thing called jumping jelly babies, which was really just like playtime, and put into the elite program when I was about 4 years old. And then from there, it was like very rigorous training. And, you know, just before I left, I was training a minimum of 20 hours a week. So it was very, very intense and very regimented. But because I was a child, that was life to me. And that's one huge benefit that I have, is that because it's always been a really strong part of my life, it's been really easy for me to integrate it. I will also say, you know, my mom has always been incredibly fit. She's been a marathon runner, so different practice altogether to gymnastics, but she very much was training every day. And we know in the research that watching your, you know, primary caregiver exercise and take control of their own health practices. I mean, we learn through observation first, not by being told, but by watching what people that we look up to do. And so, seeing my mom really dedicate time and put time aside. Another thing that she did really beautifully was that she never talked about her body. So her training was never about whether she looked a certain way. I never saw her kind of body check or grab at bits of her body. Maybe many of us often do, where we're kind of like, oh, is this part getting, oh, I don't like this part of my body or anything. None of that. All she talked about was her marathon performance or her running performance or how far she ran today and how excited she was. And I didn't think that made a difference to my relationship to exercise, because I couldn't have conceptualized it until I went back to uni, started to look at, and was working with clients and seeing what their relationship to exercise was, and was thinking, wow, this is really interesting how this is played apart. So I definitely owe a lot to both gymnastics and that regimented, early lifestyle kind of implementation, as well as learning from watching my mum.
Yeah, beautiful. And I can resonate to an extent because I've had a very similar upbringing. For me, like I was raised with a mother who was always like, you need to train to feel strong, to stay fit, to understand like the strength of your body. And she was also a dancer. She was a professional dancer who trained in Alvin Ailey and Boston Conservatory of Music. And so for having that upbringing in ballet too as her foundation, it's a lot of self-discipline that she was like, I want my daughters to understand that this is about knowing how far you can like develop and evolve within your body with no goals related to like the physical and like how do you look and how are you being seen. It was just your channel of like self-expression and your channel of knowing how to feel strong within yourself.
Yep, absolutely.
And
Makes
I also
such a difference.
well, that's a very beautiful gift for mothers to give their children, and fathers too, obviously, because it comes from both sides depending on the athletic
it does,
I guess, philosophy and mindset that comes through the generations.
Totally. And I think, yeah, definitely my dad had a similar approach. Like he was very, at the time he was very committed to his fitness as well. I think the difference is, seeing as being a woman and then seeing my mum made a difference. I'm sure, if you're a son and you identify, with being a man, then I think that would have had a different, that would definitely have had the impact there in the terms of that like father-son or mother-daughter 100%. Relationship. Yeah, for sure.
Beautiful. And when it comes to the psychology, I guess, research you've been doing, integrating that, what have you found effects is like altered in the brain that you find more fascinating? Like I'd love to see from your side in fitness, what you find so like the most profound when it comes to brain health.
I mean, look, like I guess the top line things we know is that like we commonly hear like, exercise is good for mood. We get this endorphin release. And that is nothing to kind of like, I guess, brush off. It's definitely something that's really incredible. But I think what other people don't realize is that exercise also stimulates the production of what's called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, and other growth factors as well. But BDNF promotes the survival of neurons and encourages, growth and differentiation of new neurons and synapses, and really just supports like that whole overall brain health. And I just think like it's very, I say it in a way that's like, I understand. The reason I'm getting stuck with my words is because I understand just from like real-time experience with my clients that is not necessarily a hugely motivating factor in the moment. Like when you're waking up on a cold wintry morning and it's dark and the last thing you want to do is have to get up early and train. I don't think the thing that's getting people out of bed, if I'm very, very honest about human psychology, is not the fact that, exercise is going to stimulate BDNF.
Yeah,
like neuroplasticity, neurogenesis, like it's not getting you out of bed, but it's definitely something that can contribute to this kind of long-term approach, like why we need to remember that it is important long-term, that it is important in a consistent manner. I think there's nothing wrong with utilizing short-term aesthetics. When I say aesthetics, let's just say like, I want like a more athletic look, or I want a bigger butt, or I want abs, or I want any of those sorts of things. I think use them. Let them be the things that get you out of bed, if that's the case, right? But just know that it's not the only reason. And so I think the thing that's important to remember at the back of your mind, that when you're having those days where like you're frustrated maybe about your visual progress, like whether you're actually seeing a difference, because that does take time, just remember that it's still having this incredible benefit in your brain. We're getting increased blood flow, reducing inflammation. Like I said, enhanced plasticity, there's hormonal changes that occur. Like all of these things are constantly happening if we remain consistent with our exercise, even if you can't see them happening. So I think that's the part that I want people to take away from the brain stuff.
Beautiful. And if you were to give some like a tool to how you can really enhance your healing through fitness, because obviously I think you and me could be an exception in how it's been introduced into our lives and become like a self-discipline from a very young age, where not everyone has that. So if you were to give someone a tool based on everything we just discussed to help them, I guess, start with that new mindset around like, this is healing me. Like what I'm doing right now, my body is healing me. Now that we've discussed all the levels of how that integrates, what would be something that you feel is most relevant to everything that you've learned so far?
So I actually put a couple of tools in my programs, which do come from CBT, or they're inspired by cognitive behavioral therapy. I can't call them CBT, but they are inspired by a lot of those practices, and they are kind of homework related, but they do make a difference. I think first and foremost, step one is to just pause for a moment if you're really stuck, and just try to regulate your nervous system a little bit. Because I think sometimes people feel a bit like overwhelmed, and they're like, I'm not seeing results, and I don't know what to do, and exercise is such a chore. And so I think just pause, take a few deep breaths. And I don't say that in a patronizing way of like, just calm down, okay? I more mean like you truly have to regulate yourself if you're feeling very emotional and frustrated with the practice, because as I always say, you really can't fix a problem in the same state at which it was created. So if you're feeling frustrated about something, it's not going to get better by you being more frustrated. So we need to just take a moment, pause. I like to just take like 10 deep breaths. And then the second exercise is something that's in my programs, which is just journaling exercises, but you have to be consistent with journaling, and you need to have consistent prompts as well. So we have all kinds of prompts, and every Sunday as a part of the training program, so it's physically written into your kind of schedule, is your journaling. And that is where you look at, how you felt across the week. And it's not just things like top line, like, how did you feel in your training this week? It's sort of going a little bit deeper. Were there any emotional roadblocks that came up for you? Is anything going on relationship wise for you? What are those issues? Because there is an interaction with our relationships and our motivation, and how those things can either derail or support our training. So it's worthwhile paying attention to those patterns. So I think that the number one tool is like self-awareness and identifying what is the narrative that you have been telling yourself and perpetuating about fitness. Is it a chore for you? Is it something that you're using as a form of self-punishment? Are you trying to use exercise as a sort of way to repent dietary sins? And I say dietary sins as perhaps your words, not mine, because I don't believe that there is such a thing as a dietary sin. And unfortunately, we think very dichotomously about food. A lot of the time we sort of think like, oh, a guilty treat, or what's your guilty, obsession with food, or things like that. And it's like, let's remove all of that and just think it's just food. And some food brings us pleasure in different ways. And I think it's about not trying to use exercise as, a way to try to out train things that choices we've been making in the kitchen, for example. So it's just trying to understand those things, I think, is your biggest tool, because from there you can then start to get to know, oh, this is really interesting. I thought that I actually thought I had a really great relationship with exercise, but it turns out I don't. And so what can I do to start to make this a better relationship. We can't heal what we're unwilling to feel. We've probably heard that statement said before. I don't know whose quote it is, but it's like, we really have to face these things before we can start to really know what is applicable to us to change. So that's why one of the things that I say a lot in the Vertue Method is, we're not just trying to feel better, we're trying to get better at feeling, because we can't make educated, and I say self-educated choices about the direction we need to take our training if we're completely unaware of our relationship to fitness, our relationship to training. So first step is self-regulate. Second step is self-perception, like increase that self-awareness.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Shona, for
Thank
sharing that
you.
with us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, I learned a lot. I learned a lot about the structure, and also how you relate to fitness. I think is very unique in comparison to, what's out there, because everything's very like niche when it comes to particular, fitness regimes. And I love how you've created something that's brought everything together from a holistic perspective as well. And so thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your journey with us today. And to thank you, and also to conclude on this beautiful conversation, I'd love to invite you to do a CogniFit assessment provided by our sponsor to give you a neuroplastic experience. So I'm going to make you a host.
Exciting. Okay, could we just say for the record, I'm also pregnant at the moment, so we're just going to throw that out there and say cognition can be somewhat impacted by pregnancy hormones. We'll just throw that out there, although I'm totally using that as an excuse to cover up any bad cognition that we have going here. Okay, so should I share my screen?
Yeah, share your screen, and whenever you're ready.
So I'm going to go with this one. Here we go. Okay, are you going to help me with this, or is this like me only? Hang on,
I will help you. I'll give you the prompts.
No, you need to help me.
Okay.
Let's make this a dual task.
100%. Let's do this together. So.
Listen, we got further as a species because
it's Monday morning.
connected.
100%. It's all about collaborative.
It's all about collaboration. Okay, so May's test. Do you want me to hit start?
Whenever you're ready.
Okay, here we go.
You and the baby.
We're ready. Yes, me and the baby. Come on, come on.
There's technically three of us in this play.
Yes, exactly. Although one's not helping. Okay, well, what I remember about mazes, okay, and I don't know if this is cheating, but it was to find the end and then work our way around to the front. So I kind of do that a little bit, which is maybe a bit naughty. Okay, so we're gonna go across these. Here we go.
Look at that.
Pretty
fast.
This one's not too bad, but I feel like this one was a little bit like kind of easing us in, right?
Yeah. Now we've got.
You see what I mean? Like now we're here. Like now, what is this? So we're going to go around. Okay. I mean, I think I might be cheating. I don't know if I'm cheating here.
It's all visual spatial perception skills. So like whatever you're taking in right now, I don't see how you can cheat.
Well, maybe. Okay. If you say so. I mean, I feel like I'm cheating because if you're in a real maze, right, you're not able to see the end.
That is true.
So that's why I'm sort of like, is this cheating?
That is true. But I guess it's also the puzzle of a maze, because when we're doing it.
Sorry.
Yep,
you're right.
Are the steps that you need to take. So how many moves to get till the end?
Yes, and I just stuffed that one up. So, okay, this maze is a doozy.
Is try and do it in the least amount of steps possible.
Yes, which I did not
challenge
do
you more.
So I'm sorry about that, guys. I'm letting the team down. Okay, look, see, this is the stuff that takes up so much time, and I'm really running out of time here because I don't think that this is the most effective way. Okay, here we go. I think we've got a path, guys. I think we have a path. I do love cognitive tests, I have to say. Oh, I've definitely stuffed it up. No, we haven't. Okay. I do love a cognitive task.
Nice.
So you can download this as an app, can't you?
Yes. By phone and desktop.
Yeah, it's great because I think sometimes, oh my God, all the like mindless scrolling that gets done on Instagram and all of these things that we have available to us. This is so helpful. We are almost there, guys. Team. Yes.
Amazing. Okay, so if you want to get like the scores and go more in depth, feel free to add in the data that you want.
Okay, great. So let's say, yep, okay. But I think, oh,
amazing.
100%.
Look at that.
It's okay.
80%.
It's no high distinction.
It's definitely a high distinction. Definitely a high distinction.
High distinction's 85 and above, isn't it?
Is
oh no,
it?
it's 70. Oh no, it's 75.
Depends on your region. I remember like in university, when I was doing my psychology degree as well, it was all 70% and above was like, you're nailing life.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So we did okay. Like, we did okay. There we go, baby.
Well
go
done. Triple tube. Thank you, Shona. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for tuning in today. It was a pleasure to host this conversation and dig in deep on how to make fitness your therapy. And we hope you've benefited from Shona's learnings and her story. Welcome. Today we'll be discussing psychedelic integration, but just wanted to raise a point before we begin the interview that we are by no means advocating for psychedelic use to treat mental health disorders, but as we've seen a rise in big pharma investing within the psychedelic space, as well as psychiatrists being more open to using psychedelics in clinical practice, we thought it was relevant to have this conversation and go deeper into how psychedelic integration works to help you in your healing process. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and thank you for being here today. Have you ever thought about psychedelic integration? Today and in this episode, we will explore healing with psychedelics and the integration tools we can apply to deepen our healing experiences with Amanda Efthimiou, who is a mental health advocate specialized in psychedelic integration. She bridges sacred traditions and science in the wellness and psychedelic space and has an MSc from King's College London in neuroscience and psychology of mental health, where her research was focused on the effects of psilocybin for psychotherapy for mental health outcomes. Amanda, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
And I'm really excited to kick off the conversation and hear your insights on all of this space, because I realize it's become a lot more popular when it comes to as a healing modality, but also in understanding the depths of what integration really entails, which I think is something that's very misunderstood. So in your opinion, I'd love to kick off this conversation with why have psychedelics become such a sought after healing mechanism?
Yeah, so you're right. Psychedelics are really now very trendy, not only in popular culture, but in public policy, in investment and business, in regulation, but also in science and healthcare and in wellness in general. And, I really feel it's because at this stage, so many people are suffering from mental health, from this disconnection. We see mental health now and mental illness, not just as a series of symptoms, but a real dis-ease, a disconnection from the body, from others, from the natural world. And psychedelics are offering a promise for these people where traditional pharmacological medications aren't working for them. So there's a lot of research now studying the effects of psychedelics together with psychotherapy for depression, for generalized anxiety disorder, for nicotine addiction, for substance abuse, for opioid addictions, for eating disorders, and the list goes on. And so this is a tool. This is one of the tools now that we have that we're looking into for people who are just tired of just treating their symptoms with pharmacological drugs. Because what these medicines do, these psychedelics do, is they actually look at root causes. They go really into the stories of why people are suffering the way that they are.
Yeah, 100%. And as a modality and a tool, what would you say helps us heal? How do psychedelics help us heal our mind and nervous system?
Yeah, so psychedelics, there is some science here. It's not just obviously the transpersonal effects of psychedelics. So some psychedelics are actually shown to induce structural and functional neuroplasticity, which acts on serotonergic 2A receptors and the capacity to create new neurons and wiring patterns in the brain, which really gives us the ability to adapt and to change, to learn new things. and might even induce creative cognitive abilities. And some psychedelics are also showing to activate neurogenesis in the hippocampus, which improves spatial learning and memory in performance-related tasks. At the same time, they're also being shown to decrease activity in the default mode network, which we like to call the seat of the ego, the area responsible for self-referential thought and introspection. And this area is really often very activated in people who have depression, anxiety, who are known for having these rigidity in their thought patterns and ruminations. And so these findings, just from the cognitive perspective, they're really tremendous for us. And it's a reason why we're so excited about these substances for our mental health. It shows that whatever processes that have been coded over years of destructive patterns are really allowing us to now have this flexibility to adapt. And also how we can, heal the mind and the body with these substances. On an emotional level, psychedelics can help us to expand our vocabulary for emotions. They help us to reacquaint with these feelings and using our bodies as a signal for locating them. Mm-hmm. So when we feel an uncomfortable emotion like anger or fear, psychedelics help us to observe them with more non-attachment, similar to a mindfulness meditation practice. And it really helps us to give us the tools to begin to work with these emotions with more ease. I like to say that they help us get out of our own way, so to speak.
Yeah, they definitely help facilitate like a whole new perspective. And I'd love to know more about like your personal journey as a practitioner. What brought you into this space of wanting to specialize in psychedelics and integration specifically?
So for me, my journey into the psychedelics world was actually a personal one. I myself was suffering from mental illness, and I was a walking pharmacy. I was trying all kinds of pharmaceutical drugs to help me for my symptoms. But over the years, they just weren't working for me anymore. And I wanted to really go into why I was suffering the way I was, and not just to take something just to make the pain go away, so to speak. So it was then that I tried plant medicines, and they really helped me and they opened the doors. So what I like to say is psychedelics are not a cure. They're not going to be a silver bullet that's magically going to make all these issues go away. What they do is they really open the door to allow you to take back your own control over your healing process. Mm-hmm. It really gives you that notion that you are the medicine. You're able to work through these with more ease. And so after having that personal experience, I decided to study it more deeply from a neuroscientific perspective with my degree at King's College. And afterwards, I entered the business of the industry. So I began to work with a company that was investing in psychedelic therapies and the infrastructure to support them in an accessible way for clinical trials. And it was there that I realized that everyone's talking about psychedelics from the delivery of the medicine, right? What happens during the experience. But there's actually so much about what comes after. There's this big white space on integrating. What does that even mean? What happens once we leave a peak state, and how do we actually incorporate that back into our lives in meaningful ways? And so that's when I began to look more deeply in integration, and I started my business really to focus on this for people and to help people with their struggles and overcoming them more meaningfully.
Beautiful. And what would you say, out of your personal psychedelic experiences, what has had the most impact on you in terms of which particular psychedelics? Or would you say every type of psychedelic that you worked with has given you a unique experience in itself?
Yeah, so there's, for me, every experience is different regardless of the medicine. It depends on the set and the setting, as we like to call it. So the set is the mindset that we're entering it. Perhaps sometimes we'll work with psychedelics in a more clinical capacity, or it can be recreational, or there are so many different ways to approach. And for me personally, what actually has the most impact is the integration. It's how I actually translate those insights, those peak moments, and make them a reality for me. Yeah. For me, that's the most impactful, because we have this incredibly small window of opportunity during a peak state, which can be minutes, maybe hours, days, if we're lucky. And to have a way to actually bring those aha moments that we have. They can be really positive, but also challenging, and say, okay, I'm going to do something about this that's actually going to change my life. For me, it's that process that I find the most interesting part of all of this.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's such a beautiful way to answer the question, because I do feel like that's when we really ground, all these experiences, and the peak states are achieved on so many different levels, depending on the different combinations of psychedelics that you get drawn to, especially as a healing modality. So I think it's really interesting when you really focus on the integration piece as like the most impactful, relevant part for your own journey. Because I think that's something a lot of people overlook. And I'd love to get your perspective on what you feel is most overlooked as an integration therapist.
Absolutely. So integration, as I said, is really about this capturing and synthesizing of insights from peak experiences, right? And we translate them into practices in our daily lives. We take the extraordinary, we bring it back to the ordinary, we make meaning from that. And what I feel is overlooked is really in this process from the transition to integration. So transition is actually that moment right after the peak experience ends. So if you're in a more of a therapeutic context, it's when the therapist sits with the patient and helps them return back to a normal state. Often there's a short speaking or talking session. And then in more ceremonial contexts, you have group sharing. And what I feel is during this transition period, when we're sharing, what's important after is actually to take the mind out of the equation. We've been many times working with the mind, right, to reach these peak experiences. And now what's overlooked is the allowing of the body to assimilate the experience, to give the body time to rest, and to try and not make sense of the experience with the mind. So I often suggest that when people have a peak state, if they want to feel that they want to remember everything, you can write it down right away in a journal. But just write down what happened, not necessarily what that means. What is the interpretation of what happened? How are you going to do? What are you going to do about it later? What is sort of your reflection and synthesis? Don't try and use the mind at all right in the beginning. Let your body rest. Write down what happened so you don't forget, and then put it away. And I think that's something often really overlooked in this integration process. We're really used to being in that therapeutic role where immediately we want to talk to the person, have them share all the details. But there is that moment where rest is actually very, very important prior to going back into the mind.
Yeah. So it's definitely more important to prioritize the feeling-based, I guess, assessment, you would say.
Yeah, let the feelings sort of settle, let the body assimilate, because we just reached this extraordinary state. And for many people, it can be very overwhelming. And if we try and put language to what happened right away, oftentimes that experience, the meaning of that experience can be lost. Really, the psychedelics, we think they're mind manifesting tools, but they're actually for the body and the soul and the emotions to have also a say. And so integration is really equalizing all these different dimensions.
Beautiful. And from a neuroscience perspective as well, there's a lot of new connections always being made right after that we go through these experiences. So what's really happening within us on a nervous system level that's allowing us to evolve, let's say, through these healing experiences?
Yeah, so there's something in research that we like to try to understand integration better through something called the afterglow effect. And the afterglow is the physical, mental, and psychological positive effects that linger after the peak experience ends. So peak experience, it can be up to a few hours. The afterglow is hours, days, sometimes weeks. And so what integration is really doing is it's extending that window for these insights to be assimilated. And so direct measurement of integration is still more qualitative in nature. It's still through psychotherapeutic intervention. So there's different measurement tools for that, to measure not only the physical positive changes, but also if anyone enters mystical states, there's mystical experiences that can be measured. But in terms of integration, yeah, it's about extending this afterglow, because the more we're in a position of feeling positive and having a positive outlook, the more likely we're going to make these changes and perhaps continue the changes that had begun before the experience itself. For example, when we're doing a specific type of medicine, oftentimes you're asked to refrain from eating sugar or salt, or to increase your exercise, or to make very simple but powerful lifestyle and dietary changes that oftentimes are continued afterwards. No alcohol, getting appropriate rest. And so this is this very interesting combination of working with the qualitative, emotional, somatic results of a psychedelic state.
Yeah, wow. It's so powerful on, I guess, the depths that it goes to within the body. And I'd love to ask you, like, if you could give someone one tool based on what you've already shared with us when it comes to getting out of the mind, but for anyone that might be experiencing and like exploring psychedelics for the first time, and who might not have access to the right type of integration guidance, what tool would you give to anybody wanting to explore psychedelics for their healing journey that you think is the most effective? I'm sure they're all, I mean, it might be quite difficult to narrow it down to one tool, obviously, because it's a process of being and feeling. But if you could give them one tool of awareness, I'd love to know what that is.
Sure. So as you say, there is many different tools out there. And what I like to recommend people is that they continue to work on the practices that they were doing prior to a state. So usually before working with psychedelics, we don't just jump right into these peak experiences that accelerate us to these aha moments. We go slowly. So if somebody already has a meditation practice, for example, that tool for integration would be the meditation practice, because it's allowing you to deepen what you're already starting. The journey begins before you take the medicine and it continues long after. So what is that practice that you know and that you can deepen through the use of these substances? So for example, meditation is a really good one because it helps you to remain non-attached to the challenges, to the difficulties, and to be more in a state of observation of feelings, an observation of the thoughts that come and go. And for those of us who maybe enjoy writing, I say a journaling practice where over the next days, weeks, and then every so often, once a month, perhaps for 6 months, having a time to sit and to reflect on what's happened in your life since taking that medicine or working with that psychedelic. What are the things that you can reflect on? So these are some of the more basic tools that we can actually use that we can incorporate quite easily into our practice without much effort.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Amanda, for sharing your insights and wisdom with us today. It was honestly such a pleasure to learn from you and get deep into, you know, what integration really is, because for me too, it's a whole new field in what as therapists we can learn a lot from as well when it comes to exploring all healing modalities. So I'm very grateful to have you with us today, and I'd love to invite you to a cognitive assessment that's been provided by CogniFit as a way of saying thank you and also ending this conversation with a fun little game. So
Sounds great.
You're ready, I'll make you a host, and
Sure.
we can have a little cognitive boost to kick off the rest of our day. So here you go. You should be able to share your screen now.
Great. Thank you, Cristina. All right. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, perfect.
Great. So I'll get started. Hand-eye coordination.
Tracking abilities. So we're doing very well. And this is to help with your visual and reasoning abilities. It's very peaceful to watch, I've got to say. I'm like getting into a little trance.
How am I doing?
100% accuracy so far, so not bad at all.
Great. This is fun. Ooh,
Beautiful. Nicely done. You did not flinch for a second. So thank you so much, Amanda.
thank you, Cristina.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for tuning in.